Hello and welcome to episode number 174, where I'm speaking with Acharya Shunya about her recent article titled Release Shame with Vedic Sexuality. Allow yourself to become spiritually shameless. Submerge yourself in an ocean of ever-expanding spiritual pleasure as you explore Vedic sexuality. A great conversation, so please stay tuned. Hello and welcome to the Elements of Ayurveda podcast. I'm your host Colette, and I hope to educate and empower you to take charge of your health and well-being, preventing disease in the body and mind so that you can thrive in life. I will be sharing the holistic teachings of Ayurveda, the ancient healing tradition from India. I will also discuss topics like yoga, which is the sister science of Ayurveda, health and wellness, nutrition, fitness, and mindfulness practices, as well as interviewing lots of inspiring people along the way. My humble wish is to help you to connect to your true nature, to Mother Nature, and to help you to connect to each other. If you're new to Ayurveda, I recommend that you start by listening to the first couple of episodes where I do an introduction to Ayurveda and the mind-body types. Now, if you like the content, please subscribe to the show so the new episodes will automatically download for you to enjoy. I've also set up a new private community away from social media on my new website, Elements Healing and Wellbeing. Now, this community provides a safe space for like-minded people to come together, to connect, to share, and to support each other. And I have many other perks in this community as well, so check it out. I'll put the link in the show notes or visit my website, elementshealingandwellbeing.com, and just click on the community tab in the menu. I hope you can join us. I'm looking forward to a lot more in-depth connection and conversation over there. And now, here's the show. Welcome back to the Elements of Ayurveda podcast. Today, I'm very happy to welcome back Acharya Shunya, who is an internationally renowned spiritual teacher and scholar of non-dual wisdom and an award-winning and classically trained master of yoga and Ayurveda. The first female head of her 2,000-year-old Indian spiritual lineage, she has dedicated her life to the dissemination of Vedic knowledge for the spiritual uplifting of all beings. She is the president of the Awakened Self Foundation with its international headquarters in California and author of best-selling book Ayurveda Lifestyle Wisdom, which became one of the top 10 books in alternative medicine in 2017. In her latest book, Sovereign Self, Acharya Shunya shares a comprehensive guide to yoga's most influential sacred texts, the Vedas, making their profound teachings both accessible and immediately practical for modern seekers. With Sovereign Self, Acharya Shunya shares a groundbreaking guide to the wisdom of the classic texts, so that each of us may emancipate ourselves from restrictive belief systems and discover our true nature, that which is always whole, joyful, free, and ultimately sovereign. Acharya Shunya, welcome back to the podcast. It's always a pleasure to have you.
Oh, I am always looking forward to talking to you. You have such a vibrant community here through your podcast and all the work you're doing. Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure. Well, I contacted you, Acharya Shunya, because I read your recent article titled Release Shame with Vedic Sexuality, where you stated that you should allow yourself to become spiritually shameless. Submerge yourself in an ocean of ever-expanding spiritual pleasure as you explore Vedic sexuality. And I just had to have you on the podcast to share this with the audience. You talk about how human sexuality must be made less important and that by suppressing it or denying it, we become more obsessed with it. Can you talk to us a little bit further about this, please?
What's fascinating is that so much teaching has come out of India, and of course we see it in the Christian tradition and everywhere where sex is somehow considered an obstacle to our spiritual beingness. But when I look into the original teachings coming out of India, more original, older than Hinduism, Buddhism, which is big on not liking sex. So, you come to the Vedas, which is the root of Ayurveda and yoga. And there you find that healthy sexuality, its legitimate expression, and even pursuit of pleasure for pleasure's sake, known as kama, is considered as a necessary ingredient of life. And if we were not to do that, then we would become psychosomatically affected. It's like sex has been given an equal importance to food and sleep in Ayurveda, as you well know. It's one of the sub-pillars, one of the 3 pillars of health. And when you go to the ancient Vedas, you find these rishis and rishikas, the male and female seers, enjoying married life and even live-in relationships, more than one partner. But that was the way. I'm not advocating that's how it should be. Yeah. All I'm saying is there was this part of our being, this intimate need of our body was taken care of. To the extent that if women and men were not satisfied in their relationships sexually, they were asked to seek satisfaction, to make it important. But then we see religions and spiritual teachings coming out, which are almost telling you to become sexless versions of yourself. And that's where I believe we've gone wrong.
Yeah, like you said, the more we repress that, the more that it takes on this massive importance.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
Now, you did mention that pleasure is kama and is one of the 4 aims of life, according to Ayurveda. Isn't that correct?
Yes. So the 4 aims of life are, it begins with artha, kama, dharma, moksha. Artha is survival. And birds and animals are trying to survive, and we humans have to. So we have to do what it takes to survive. If that means commuting to a job, if that means saving some money, working overtime. And this includes emotional survival, where we want clear boundaries. We want to be in relationships and community. And so if we do things around that as a soul, it's not wasting time. It is a valid goal. And therefore, money is not a bad deal in the Vedas. And having some money and wealth and some saved away is a good idea. Then comes, like, once you have comfort and survival, now you need some pleasure. You need some recreation, including sexual pleasure, painting, art, music, dancing, rapping, whatever that takes, that form that takes, gardening and traveling. And this also has to be unapologetically an important goal in our life if we want a balanced life, a life of santulan, or, balance and happiness and health. Finally, they say, don't stop with that. Do bring in dharma, which is the concept of greater ethics. And when you do pursue wealth and pleasure, it should be ethical. And what's basic ethics or basic dharma is, for our listeners, even if you don't know Sanskrit, you do know your heart. And what you don't want done to you, you don't want to do unto others. If you don't want to be cheated, don't cheat. If you don't want to be lied to, don't lie. That's bottom line dharma, according to the Vedas. And if you bring the consideration of dharma into sexuality, you won't believe it, Colette, but even an orgy is all fine and good if it's between consenting adults and it is dharmic.
Yeah, I saw that in your article.
Yeah, that's the thing.
But
no shaming.
And that's what I was about to say, because the shame can have such an effect on our health and well-being. That emotion of shame has such a negative impact on our bodies and our minds, right?
Right. And how did we humans end up in this position? And we need to really bring that. That's why I came up with this title, being sexually shameless, because I almost felt like it needed to have that kind of headline grabbing texture to it, the work that we have to do. And I'm a married woman, and I've been married twice, and I have birthed a child, and I'm a guru to thousands. And at the same time, I've birthed a child. What does that mean? What does it mean that I'm this frigid, cold version of me? and then only I become worthy of being a guru. So I didn't want to separate that, and I knew this was treading a new path, but I felt compelled to do it because I'm just, I think it's over now. This need to repress and suppress your sexuality, pretend to be a celibate, and then we hear all these stories of the celibate swamis and rinpoches and the gurus and the priests and the pastors abusing people sexually.
Yeah.
And somewhere I feel sorry for them because they walked into an unconscious system, subscribed to it with all their sincerity, but then their sexuality exploded and they went into unethical behavior. What if we all had adult conversations around this?
Right, because that which we repress, which we push down, will come out somewhere else.
And it will come out in a monstrous way,
Exactly.
in a way that also fills us with guilt and shame and psychosomatic disorders. So I wanted to bring up this topic of sexuality because I want to share with our listeners that for a brief moment, even I too had some shame around not having my marriage together because I come from an Indian culture. I come from a family of 2,000 years where nobody has had a breakup in their marriage. Nobody has had more than one sexual partner. And so, but then I was like, I'm a spiritual teacher and I had to apply all this. And I say, where is this nonsense shame coming from?
Yeah. It's so true. And if anything, this gives you like so much world experience, so much life experience from which to talk from. Being a parent, being a wife, going through, a separation and so on.
And going through separation and remarrying from an enlightened place, from what I call as an enlightened vulnerability. So I hold my enlightenment and my human vulnerability in one plate, in one place, in my heart, and not pretending to bypass and be this non-sexual, almost vegetable-like edified version of myself just to claim some kind of spiritual superhuman label.
Yeah, absolutely. So how do we become spiritually shameless with Vedic sexuality? You gave some great pointers in your article, and I'd love for you to share them with us.
Thank you. Yes, this article is on spirituality and health, if I remember correct.
That's
right?
correct,
Okay.
Yeah.
So I hope people find that there. But I would say that definitely we want to not be with people or traditions or cultures or even religions that are telling us to be ashamed about our spirituality. I'm just going to say that.
Yeah.
If your teacher or if your tradition or if your family and your culture, you want to not necessarily shoot them in the head, but you do want to recognize that they have subscribed to an unconscious belief and it's not your belief. Just this cognitive discernment is a big separation. Like that's not what I'm going to subscribe to. That's one thing. Number two, I would say be open about your sexuality, your needs. There comes a time in everybody's life, and I'm at that stage where my sexual energy is no longer important to me. It was once, and it is not. My creative energy, my intellectual energy has taken over. My spiritual energy leads the way. And that spiritual energy is leading the way because I was once properly, fully, and unapologetically sexual. So be transparent about your sexuality. And if you find yourself suppressing those parts or hiding them in conversation, make a mental note and try and be more transparent.
Yes.
So instead of being ashamed about the fact that I have had two partners coming from a Hindu, spiritual, traditional, 2,000-year-old lineage background, I decided to talk about it on every talk show in America.
Okay, good for you.
This is my way of role modeling how to do this.
Yeah.
So it's not that I'm trying to gain something, but it's like, you know what, I'm not going to go by those systems. And it's my way of saying this makes me even more beautiful that I didn't live in a codependent, unhappy marriage. And I live what I teach, to live an empowered, boundless, amazing life. So that's one thing. And then if you study Ayurveda and you understand Ayurveda is medicine, whose parents are the Vedas, so it's Vedic medicine. And if you look at the Ayurveda teachings there, then it's so interesting that we go into Vagbhata, a sage who has written the Ashtanga Hridayam, one of our classical texts, and he says, right there, he says that from a healthy sexuality comes luster and beauty and fame and wisdom. Wisdom. He connects wisdom and awakening to a healthy sexuality. And Ayurveda gives dharmic rules. Like I came across rules in Ayurvedic scriptures and texts which say things like, don't sleep with someone just from attraction. They should respect you. Now look at that. And you should respect them back. That's Dharma 101. Then it talks about making sure that we don't hurt anyone in the process of our sexuality. So we don't want infidelity unless it is an accepted and agreed agreement. So we see a whole context. We also see in Ayurveda some teachings around Ritucharya or seasonal sexual behavior that I talk about in my book, Ayurveda Lifestyle Wisdom, and this is not for the lovers in the first flush of sexual passion, because there are no rules. But once you settle down into a relationship, we are like every other animal, and men and just like dogs and cats come in heat and not in heat, and the males are more available, the females are less. Males and females both have rhythms or seasons within our being. And I talk about that topic, and I recommend when to tune in more with your sexual energy and when to let it rest so that it can revive itself. So this is human observation for 5,000 years by Ayurveda sages. This is not knowledge available ordinarily. So when I had people who had run out of sexual libido or they were just not interested, like physically or emotionally turned off, I recommended them the seasonal way of being sexual, where they had periods of rest and periods of passion. They found they were much more balanced and healthy again in their libido. So there are some kernels of truth, but nowhere does Ayurveda say, and now to be healthy, and now to be spiritual, and now to be evolved, zip up, and you're done. Nowhere does it say that. In fact, it says if you suppress it, you will become sick. Vata dosha, or the energy that moves within the body, it is meant to move and ejaculate and release, and none of that will happen. It will all build up, and the first thing it will show up when you disturb apana, or the lower moving energy. It shows immediately in udana, or upward moving energy, and you start having sleeplessness, insomnia, anxiety, panic, and even morbid thoughts and depression, etc. So it's directly related, and no wonder people who have forcefully suppressed their sexual release, whether male or female, because females also have a release, males also have a release. Whether you see it or you don't see it, there's a release, and what's releasing really is vata dosha. So if you don't release it, what it does is it does show up in a mental morbidity, no doubt about that. Now, there are people who are lonely or who don't have a partner, but then even there, nowhere does in Ayurveda say you can masturbate and can't release. I mean, kids masturbate. It's little children rock, and so they touch their body. So I've seen my, my puppies, like they're barely 1 year old and they're sexual. Why? The whole universe is sexual. And so to create all this nonsense around masturbation is like losing your energy and your shakti. It's all like man-made creations, not even woman-made. And then, and then they become like spiritual laws. So stop here. But I think our listeners will get the point that Ayurveda is a healthy science to live with healthy sexuality. And I hope, and people are confused, they can always come to my book or my studies, teachings, but it's right there. And there you are supporting this view as an Ayurveda teacher yourself.
Yeah, I just think it's so important that we really embrace everything in our bodies, in our minds, and that there's no ignoring any part of our body, because I think it has such an effect on our energy when we do that.
Absolutely. The whole being is connected. It's not like we can just take out the sexual unit and let it hang out on, to dry. It's not like that. The whole thing is connected. And that is why the Ayurveda sages declared that ahara, nidra, and maithuna, sexual act, are food, sleep, and the sexual act are very important considerations, and we can't neglect any one.
Mm-hmm.
And we also need them to be balanced. So, for example, we have rules around, don't indulge in the sex act right after eating, because that will disturb your Agni or digestive fire.
Right.
But do it a few hours later and things like that. So we have all those things which help with the sexual act. And when we can go back to these ancient 5,000-year-old teachings and we realize, wait, they are asking us to be sexual. And in fact, there's a whole sub-science in Ayurveda called Vajikarna, which is teaching us how to be wildly sexual, how to be successfully sexual, how to be sexual to the last day of our life.
To have longevity and vitality.
Yeah.
Wonderful. So I'm going to jump in here because talking about longevity and vitality, and Acharya Shunya mentioned Ritucharya, which in Ayurveda means seasonal regime or seasonal discipline, because of the impact the change of seasons can have on our body and our mind. So Ayurveda recommends that as we go through the transition of the seasons, that we have this seasonal discipline. And in Ayurveda, a cleanse is recommended. So particularly between the joint of the seasons from spring into summer and then from summer into autumn. And I want to let you know that I'm holding a group discounted digestive reset cleanse starting on April 16th. And with this cleanse, you get a 90-minute one-to-one online consult with me so I can tailor the recipes, yoga, meditation, pranayama, mindfulness, whatever I think you need to bring your body and mind into balance. The objective is that you will eliminate and digest any accumulated physical toxins or emotional toxins from the previous season so that you're not carrying them into the new season. So you can enter the new season feeling light and clear and energetic. You also get educational webinars. There's a supportive community of people going through the cleanse with you so that you are supported, and there's accountability there as well. So check out those links in the show notes for the group cleanse starting April 16th and the private cleanse where you get to choose your own dates. And I hope you can join us. Okay, let's get back to my chat with Acharya Shunya. Is it correct that I read somewhere that the Vedas mention about when a fetus is formed, that it is neither male or female?
Yeah, that's very fascinating. In fact, the Vedas, the Upanishads, which is the end part of the Vedas, say that the true self is neither male nor female, and it can be male, female, or an in-between of any gender. Yeah. But the self is the same in all. So one is there is a complete acceptance of all genders. So that's one of the reasons I promote it. And the other thing is that even science has confirmed that the fetus in the beginning is not any one gender, but it gradually, due to karma and other reasons, it becomes a gender. Yeah.
Isn't that wonderful? You know, here we are in this modern age, subjecting people to terrible shame and not being able to be their true self. And here, this ancient wisdom tells us that fetus is formed without a sex.
Yeah, and probably these are the reasons that as a modern woman, but as a trustee of an ancient tradition, I come from an ancient lineage. I'm really an ambassador of this tradition because I feel like we modern people need a lesson or two here. Mm. I mean, this is timeless wisdom. This is not Hindu wisdom or Indian wisdom or Buddhist wisdom just because Buddha came from India. It's not like that. This is timeless wisdom. It is scientific. And it talks to the human existence. And therefore, sexual balance is what I would have taught. But right now, I'm teaching sexual shamelessness because that's what we need to come back to a place of balance. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. And in the article, you mentioned that the Vedas preached no hollow morality. Can you talk a little bit about that?
It is fascinating that if you look at the Upanishads, you find all kinds of teachers, men and women, which is fine. But then you find a teacher who is a prostitute. And so she is a prostitute because she was born to a prostitute. So that's her profession.
Right.
So that's what she does for her artha, her survival,
Wow.
right?
Yeah.
But that didn't mean that she can't have spiritual ascendancy. And so she gives a sermon to the rest of humanity. Like, which scripture will you find where a prostitute is shown as a guru? Where would you find that? We have teachings from a butcher. And here we have everybody saying, don't just be vegetarian for, being non-violent to animals, but be vegetarian for morality reasons, I don't understand that. What if you're an Eskimo, living in the Eskimo land?
Yes.
How do you even eat vegetarian salads?
Right.
And all you can find is fish.
Yes, I agree. Yeah.
So the Vedas or Ayurveda don't prescribe vegetarianism. Nowhere. They suggest what is seasonal, what is appropriate, where you grow, what you need. So I feel like these are some myths propounded by religions, not by spiritual wisdom tradition like the Veda. And when I talk like that, sometimes I get flack. Sometimes I get nasty emails from Americans too, not just Hindus. I mean, from Americans, like, diehard vegans and vegetarians saying, what kind of a spiritual teacher are you promoting non-vegetarian or, meat eating? And I'm like, no, I'm just promoting sensibility, and sure, you want to be kind and you want to be compassionate, and we definitely don't want to ill-treat our animals. And I may not eat meat, and that's the point here. I'm not going to try and convert everybody to becoming a non-eater. I'm going to teach everybody to be selfless and not be selfish and to be kind. So,
yeah, and that's the way I see with these teachings with Ayurvedic wisdom, is that it really teaches that there's no one size fits all, and that each person has the right to, be at one with their true nature and, to live in their own lane, as it were, and to choose what's best for them, but living with, compassion and empathy and love. But that can be in many different forms.
Right. And I have met people who are spiritual and they, they may not be having a pure vegetarian diet, but they are very kind. And I people who are totally vegetarian and they are hoarding their food and they're angry and not evolved. Yeah. So the one size fits all doesn't work. There is no cookie cutter teaching from the Vedas. This is macro understanding of doing the right thing in a given context.
Yes,
exactly. Context.
Yes. And that's the important thing to remember, that everyone has a different experience in this world.
Yes. So before we judge, we should, we should be paying attention. Yeah.
Absolutely. And, at the moment I'm studying a lot about the management of Ayurvedic, diseases, and particularly with depletion and degeneration. And it comes up again and again that excessive sexual activity is given as one of the nidana, or the causes, and especially for men. And I'd love for you to share with people why Ayurveda gives us this logical reason and recommends modifying sexual activity in the treatment protocol of these degenerative or diseases of depletion.
The Vata dosha is involved with the ejaculation of the sperm. And if one has excessive sexual activity or depletion, we lose Shukra Dhatu, or the sperm. And the sperm is a evolved tissue. It goes through many changes. The food is digested. It becomes a mother tissue called rasa. Then it becomes rakta, or blood, then muscle or mamsa, then fatty tissue, meda, then bone tissue, and then we develop Shukra. So your body has put in a lot of effort to create that drop of Shukra. Or that drop of Shukra is a Sanskrit word for sperm. So the body has gone through a lot of macro and micro digestive processes. And the food you eat today may take up to 30 days to become that drop of Shukra. And if due to habit, compulsiveness, addictions to porn, etc., or anxiety, and the only way you can release that anxiety is by ejaculating, and you start doing that, you are overworking your organ of procreation and sexuality, and you are losing that shukra. So what that does is it creates tissue depletion. It creates a depletion all along the chain. And then when shukra is depleted, what does shukra do is, according to Ayurveda teachings, shukra doesn't live only in your testicles or in your reproductive organs, but shukra lives in each and every cell of your being, giving you beauty and attractiveness and radiance and creativity and joy. And gradually you start losing, because body wants to keep ejaculating, so you lose chakra from every place of your being. And then you look shut down, and I've met people like that. Some were psychosomatically disturbed and they were ejaculating 20 times a day. So people would come to me when I had a practice, and I have a school of Ayurveda, and I talk to people, and 20 times a day, 30 times a day, that's not normal. Yeah. So they barely have anything in their body. They can barely stand. Right. I had a person who came to meet me, and he couldn't sit up. He asked if he could lie down and talk to me. Wow. No shakti, no strength left, because he was losing it in his shukra. And then as he continued with the masturbation, after a while there were no drops of shukra. There was just air and pain. This can be, it doesn't happen for everyone, but because the male shukra can be lost through your own self-stimulation, versus the female, there is not a physical loss, but in the male, there's a physical loss. Excessive sexual activity leads to what is known as dhatukshaya, or loss of vital tissues that are the portals of strength in your body.
Yeah, and shukra is very closely associated with ojas.
Very much so, because if shukra is lost, then the very last thing, known as ojas, needs shukra, but it cannot be created. And ojas is your immune essence, it's your vitality, it is your, it is that special substance in your body that, according to Ayurveda, you cannot see, but it keeps you free of diseases. It protects you. It's your mantle. So you're losing your tissues, you don't have your immunity, and you're caught up in some habit or addiction, and it's going to show up as ill health of body and mind.
Right. So, so it is important to be aware of that and make sure you're having that moderation.
Oh, absolutely. And if possible, even follow the seasonal guidelines for sexual activity if you are so ready to get into a state of balance. Yeah.
Right. And I remember reading that actually in your book.
Yeah.
You cover that in your book.
Absolutely, in great details.
Okay,
yes.
And I'll put the link to that in the show notes as well. My pleasure. So if somebody's listening to this, Acharya Shunya, and they want to start on this journey of becoming spiritually shameless, what would your recommendations be? Because, shame is not an easy emotion to shift, and especially if it goes back to a very young age. And if you were raised on this shameful teachings.
I think to become spiritually shameless and to embark on the journey, especially if from childhood you have become conditioned to be ashamed about who you are, then I would say that you should find traditions and teachers who are constantly talking about this very topic, because that shame is, what is that shame? If you look at it, it's a bunch of thoughts that you have held to your own. Now, the way to change that cluster of thoughts is to be exposed to new thoughts. So to begin with, I would even suggest listening to this podcast a couple of times until, you start feeling it. You're not just hearing it, but you're feeling it. That's one thing. And so to accept your nature as a little bit wild, a little bit raw, and a little bit passionate is totally the healthy thing to do. So that's one thing. So you want to do that. And one of the teachings that I give is that you should meditate on a statement that my sexuality is intrinsic and important to my spirituality. It is not separate from it. So if you keep doing it, my sexuality is intrinsic and important, that would be really important. I would even suggest standing naked with your altar or your spiritual books or your traditions around you and looking at your sexual parts with so much love.
Yeah. Yeah.
So much gratefulness, because you have emerged from the sexual parts of your parents and they have emerged from their parents. This whole planet would die out if we all became celibate.
Mm-hmm.
And I really question traditions and teachers which have taught celibacy as a way of life. And I have my own opinions and I don't want to go there. But I question that can work for the curious few. It cannot be a mass prescription. And it really helps to realize that you've been a victim of mass unconsciousness and mass sleepwalking. And this is an age of revival and waking up from that sleepwalking behavior. That's what it is. And sex is not just to make babies, but sex, there is a reason you have pleasure buttons on your body.
Yes.
And if anybody has to blame, then your creator, that so-called God, has to be blamed.
Yeah.
So if those sexual buttons are not no cell, no single atom in this universe is futile. There's a reason, and that pleasure can be enjoyed for pleasure's sake. And I have to put in a word that I'm so glad that I grew up. I don't define myself with any one religion now, but I would say I like it that in Hinduism, all the gods are making divine love. I like it.
Yes.
And I like how in Ayurveda, the whole universe and this body has come from the lovemaking of Purusha and Prakriti, the male and female aspects of ourselves, the Shiva and Shakti.
Yes.
So if you're an adult, follow the laws of the nation you live in. You know, there might be some sexual laws that you can or cannot indulge in. It's just you want to be safe. But at the same time, in your own mind, you have the power to make decisions related to your sexual life. And you have to take it back now. And shame, I think, is a great opportunity to come into light, because shame is just a bunch of residual thoughts that have got deposited in your body, just like you clean your vacuum cleaner and remove it. You have to remove the shame. It's nothing but a bunch of thoughts. It's not a permanent scar unless we want to make it. That's what I would say.
Yeah, and I think that's very good advice there, Acharya Shunya, because you have to bring awareness to it and bring that shame out of the dark, right? And, you know, like you're saying, stand in front of the mirror naked and appreciate and be grateful for this body. And that's what I love about Ayurveda. Nothing is hidden. It's very open. It talks about every subject. It gives us guidelines. Somewhere along the way, we lost our way and the freedom that we should be enjoying our sexuality with. And I think you're correct. I think the future is releasing that shame and, you know, enjoying and really embracing our sexuality.
That's right. I think time has come, and that is why I, in my own Ayurvedic teaching and writing, I like to expose those facets of Ayurveda that are lesser known. Everybody's talking about dosha balancing and dosha balancing teas, etc. But how can we bring balance to the wrong beliefs? And how can we go back to Ayurveda and its parent, the Vedas, to come back saying, wait, once upon a time there were seers, men and women. This is what I like, because the Vedas were authored, but not just by male seers, but by 27 female seers. So there were men and women who knew better. And, I can go into this knowledge and it's so reaffirming. And it's not like I read a chapter on being shameless with your sexuality. It's not like, but I came to my own conclusions. And then I looked around me and I saw all the holier than thou behavior of these spiritually cut out figures and leaders. And then sooner or later we heard a scandal. Yeah. And so when it was time for me to be on the world stage, because I have now students and disciples worldwide, I wondered, how am I going to be scandal free? Well, then I guess I just have to be scandalous from the beginning. And talk about the things that are taboo, and put it out there.
Yes, I think the vulnerability, being open, that's what helps you connect with others. And it, like we said earlier, all these experiences you've had in your life helps you to be empathetic towards others and helps you understand that, that aspect of life, when you're talking and when you're teaching.
I mean, I was chosen at a very young age to lead an ancient lineage by my grandfather, the first female head of an ancient lineage. And he must have seen something in me. I had my period of doubt, and I'm like, was Baba, my teacher, sure I should be the one? But now I realize that for the 21st century, to have a person like me who has gone through the ups and downs of life and has seen separation and remarriage and has understood what it means to be a broken or a blended family. I am very cut out to help my students of the 21st century because that is the reality everywhere, including India. So how do we not bring these conversations into our meds and be proud of those conversations and open the doors to all those alleyways where we thought we need to shut the door and be quiet about them? Let sunlight come into every area of our life. And I have students who recover from health because they let go of shame, period.
Yeah, I totally believe that. Emotion of shame can really hold us back.
Yeah, absolutely. So we wanna watch out for when our own mind, because after a while, it's not people or culture or religions that shame us. A part of our mind starts shaming us, right? It's part of our mind that starts saying, "You're no good," or and so that's when you have to talk back to your mind, and this is known as the path of Jnana Yoga, or using thought to counteract ignorant thoughts, using enlightened thoughts to counteract ignorant thoughts, and to then maybe study the Vedas or Ayurveda or read my books or, listen to this podcast and things like that, to then support yourself in having a very level-headed conversation with yourself to say, what is this? When I was young and influenceable, I subscribed into what is an unconscious thing in the whole planet, but now I'm waking up from it. I'm done.
Yeah, that's it. When you know better, do better, right? You may have grown up in a certain way. You may have internalized some of this shame, but then as you grow and learn, you learn there's another way.
You learn this another way. And, I want to say this, like I've had students who said, I grew up Catholic and I have shame. I'm like, connect to the truth of Jesus. Don't connect to human-made customs and traditions around Jesus. Like, what is stopping you from connecting to the God and have your own relationship is what I say. And people have come back. They don't have to throw the baby with the bathwater.
Exactly.
They don't have to leave their religions or become Vedic or agnostic or atheist. They just have to be level-headed with everything we buy on this planet. And that's what I talk about in my latest book. It's like you have a relationship with people and things in this world, but you have to have a relationship with your own self. That should be a primary relationship.
Absolutely. Your own true nature should shine, and that what speaks truth to you, rather than following something wholeheartedly, choose what feels right for you.
Yeah. And feel right for you, and then bring dharma into it so that it doesn't just become an indulgence.
Yes.
There's definitely a me first movement going on where, and I know you're not saying that and I'm not saying that, but I also want to underline that anything I teach, including being sexually shameless, it's always on the foundation of dharma. And dharma comes from the root word dhri, which comes from dharyante iti dharmaha. These are behaviors and values and attitudes that not only sustain you, but the whole world. And so if I am sexual, what I'm doing in my bedroom is not hurting anyone else. And because of this sexual self-permission, I come back and be a happier parent, a better citizen, a good friend, then more strength to my sexual behavior, right? Yeah. But if my sexual choices are hurting even one person and which could include you, like you're compromising yourself, or you're compromising your children, or you're cheating on your partner instead of being upfront, then it may be time to look at, it's true that I want to be shameless, but I do want to give deference to dharma. That I feel is, because you can't sidestep dharma. Nobody can.
Yes.
It comes to then.
Yeah, absolutely. Very, very good point. You mentioned there, Acharya Shunya, your new book, Sovereign Self. Can you tell us about it?
Well, Sovereign Self is kind of bringing this entire Vedic tradition from its teachings on sexuality to how to become, gatherers of light from within, but in a very authentic manner, because I hadn't found books that could bring together teachings from Ayurveda, from the Bhagavad Gita, from the Upanishads, from the Veda Samhitas, and the Yoga Sutras, all together in this conversational style that a modern seeker can be rooted into the Dharma and yet have the permission to be more and better and radiant. And I wanted to write a book that has transformed my life and the life of all my students. And it took me 3 years, but again, sounds true, published this book. And I'm happy to tell you that it's been a bestseller from day one and continues to make raves. So Sovereign Self does talk about sexuality and being, and maybe needing to be shameless about it. Just there's no option for shame-filled sexuality.
Love it. So that would be a very good follow-up to this conversation if people are interested in reading more on this.
Yes, absolutely. My 2 books, Ayurveda Lifestyle Wisdom, will give you more. I talk about, it's a whole chapter on sex, if you remember. And
That's
so
right.
there I get to the nitty-gritty of things. But if you want to address the shame part, then I would say read the Sovereign Self. The whole book kind of makes us become free of shame and become more of the people we were meant to be. And it's never late to be the person you were meant to be. And I'm not just saying it as a cliche. I mean, we have been born. If a daisy is born, a little daisy flower doesn't question if it's worthy to be a daisy or not. It does its darnest best to be the biggest daisy in my garden, right?
Yes.
I see tiny bits of grass growing on concrete and it's trying to live too and blossom. Then why do we humans shut down? And so our disease is the disease of thoughts. And these disease of thoughts I address in the book called Sovereign Self. And there are students who are reading 1 page a day and they are reporting in my community that 1 page is changing their relationship with their own self.
Wow, that's beautiful. And in the article, at the end, you said, becoming spiritually shameless unites you with a greater truth.
Yeah. But that greater truth is the greater truth of self. And it's also the greater truth of this universe, which is clearly unapologetically sexual. And sexuality is also connected to joy, happiness, creativity, love, sense of well-being. And so being sexually shameless is then the doorway to something we may have shut down. And I did want to bring up, Colette, that, there might be some listeners on our podcast who are not, who are not sexually active, and they might be thinking, oh, shoot, I missed the bus, right?
Right.
So I'm more talking about an attitude change more than even being in the sexual act.
Right.
Because if you have a sexual partner or not, that a lot depends on your lifestyle, your life state, situation, opportunity, etc. But you should not be mentally shut down and mentally ashamed. And depending on the stage of your life, you may be more or less sexual. But then you still have a very comfortable relationship with it and an open, transparent relationship with it. I mean, do you remember, Colette, when women wouldn't talk about the periods and they would say, I'm being visited by my chums? Do you remember?
Yeah. It was like when I was growing up, it was like talking in code.
Yeah, talking in code. And then the strap shouldn't show.
Oh, absolutely. And hiding all your sanitary products. And there was such secrecy around it all.
Yeah, but it was never that for men. It was always women.
Yeah.
And I mean, I grew up in India, and I remember that men's undergarments would be hanging there on the on the drying, with
The
that
line.
laundry.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the women's would be inside somewhere, in a hidden area.
Wow.
And I was like 10 or 12 and I questioned that.
Yeah.
So
From a
probably I
young
just had,
age.
from a young age, I questioned that. And I'm like, why?
Right.
And so why, and I agree that I'm not talking about crudeness, and I'm not saying we must burn the bra or show the strap. And I don't teach rebellion behavior.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just teaching self-acceptance of the body.
Yes.
And the clothing that supports the body is sacred.
Mm-hmm.
And nothing needs to be hidden. Nothing needs to be flaunted for some reason, but at least it should not be hidden from shame. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah. It's like denying a part of ourselves.
It's a denying a part, and we're all talking about reclaiming the inner child, living a more whole life, living a balanced life. Then how can women and even men who have so much shame around their sexuality, how can we play these games with ourselves?
Yeah.
It's just playing games with ourselves
It is.
humanity. Yeah.
It's like I said, it's part of our true nature. We should embrace it, whether we're in partnership or not, but just having, a healthy understanding of the importance of our sexuality and, again, not denying it.
Not denying it, and having self-restraint where our sexuality, I talk about it in Sovereign Self, or one of my books. I'm sorry, but our sexuality should be self-restrained. There should be dharma. There should be boundaries. It should not become something others have to put up with. So we become sexual predators or abusers.
Yeah.
So those considerations also have to be there. This is all dharma. But on that stage of dharma, can my sexuality shine as much as my breath?
Yeah.
Or my intelligence, or my limbs?
Yeah.
That's what I said, when it needs to be made less important. We're almost giving it a negative kind of importance.
Yeah, absolutely. And then when we repress it, then we want it more. And then there's more of an indulgence in it, which in the end is, depleting. So it's about just respecting everything in moderation and understanding it's an important part of life, but not abusing it.
Not abusing it. Absolutely. So these considerations have, and I didn't know I would be a champion for this, or I would be a champion for something called enlightened vulnerability, or the sovereign self, which is the title of my book. But as I find myself in my 50s, on a planet that is technologically remarkably progressed, but spiritually and from a knowledge perspective really regressed.
Yeah.
We have racism, we have social injustice, we have hatred, we have mass hypnotic unconscious behaviors. I needed to then put this out as a teacher.
Yeah, it is amazing how we've advanced in technology, but now we're going back to these ancient teachings to help us figure out where we went wrong spiritually, emotionally, and so on.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, thank goodness we have these amazing Vedic texts to help us and to guide us.
Isn't that right? I mean, I feel so lucky to have this knowledge and feel the responsibility to spread that light.
Yeah, and the fact that the knowledge is very open, it's very accepting, it's very logical. There's no, as we said, one size fits all. There's no, this must be the way. Ayurveda, I find, is very flexible. And there's no saying, it's guidelines. It's not saying you must do this.
Yeah, I love that. It's very scientific, it's universal, and it's not filled with prejudices and biases of cultural or religious nature. And it does have a whole teaching on dharma, but then dharma is universal. It's not just for one kind of people. We all want to be conscious human beings, don't we? Absolutely. So that we can enjoy our sexuality or any other gifts, and yet we be grounded and supportive in truth and dharma. That's the important point.
Absolutely. Well, Acharya Shunya, as always, it's just always so lovely to chat with you. You always share so much great wisdom, and I truly appreciate it. And I'd love, before we finish up, if you could tell people where they could find out more about you and your offerings, and I'll put everything in the show notes as well.
Well, if they look up my name, Acharya Shunya, which I'm sure you'll spell out,
Yes.
I have a website by that name, acharyashunya.com, and all my social media handles run by my team, Facebook, Instagram, etc., are by Acharya Shunya, at Acharya Shunya. So you can find me. And I offer teachings on Ayurveda. I have a 1-year, 18-month amazing course called Alchemy with Ayurveda. And then I teach my book, Sovereign Self book, has come alive in a course called the Sovereign Self Paradigm. And it's continuing right now. I plan to teaching it twice a year. And people come through a 15-week journey. They come in feeling a little bit full of shame or disease or sorrow. And I'm expecting they're going to walk out much happier, like all my students do.
Wonderful.
And I may sound a little vain here, but I'm not doing this. This is the beautiful teachings that I'm able to give. It's the real Vedic teachings are what make all the difference.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Beautiful. Well, it's always a pleasure. And thank you so much for making the time today to talk with us. And I truly appreciate you putting this information out into the world. I think it's very valuable, which is why I wanted to have you on the podcast so we could spread this information more.
Thank you so much.
I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Acharya Shunya. I certainly did. Such important information there. And please go to the show notes to find all the links to Acharya Shunya. However, if you want to go right now, let me spell that name for you. Acharya Shunya, Acharya. Shunya is Shunya. And the website is acharyashunya.com. Again, all the links in the show notes. Also in the show notes, you'll find the link to the upcoming seasonal digestive reset cleanse starting April 16th and the private cleanse if you want to choose your own dates. Also, if you haven't subscribed to the podcast, please do so the new episodes will automatically download for you. And if you would like to rate and review the podcast, I would truly appreciate that. Don't forget, we also have the private Elements of Ayurveda community on my website, elementshealingandwellbeing.com, and we continue the conversations over there. So check out that link in the show notes also. Thank you so much for listening. If you think that this episode will be helpful to family or friends, please share it with them so we can get this wisdom out there. Until next time, take good care of yourself, be well, and slán go fóill. Bye for now.